Hi everybody, it's Stephen Brooke and welcome to Architectural Photography and Composition. Up to now, the only way we've supported the site is with sales of my ebook, Architectural Photography and Composition. And if you are just starting out or a professional wanting to shoot their own architecture, this is the book for you. There's everything you need to know in that book. And a number of people have written me, professionals, saying, where was this book when I was starting out? Well, sorry I didn't have it then, but here it is now, and I think this will really help you. And up to now, I haven't promoted any products. I've mentioned that I shoot Canon and everybody uses Photoshop, and in my video on essential equipment, I mentioned some products, but I'm not affiliated with any of those. But there is a product that I have an affiliation with that I want to introduce you to. In my video on layering, I talked about why layering really changed the nature of architectural photography, because in essence it gave us so much more time to shoot, particularly if you're shooting in an interior and looking out of a window. The time to do that with film, unless you blasted a lot of light in there, you had a little time early in the morning and little time late in the evening, twilight, that you could balance the interior lights with the exterior. But with layering, of course, you can now do several exposures and put them together and basically photograph the room the way your eye sees it. Now, if you have just one room and one exposure for that room and an exposure for the window, putting two of them together is pretty easy work. But if you have 50, 60, 100 files that you have to do for a project, and some of these views have more than one image that you need to make your composite, you need another program to do that. This is a typical range of exposures. For example, in this interior, I needed one exposure for the skylight, one overall for the room, and then a brighter one to pick up the wood in the back, and put the three of these together. Now, if you do this in the old way, one at a time, this will take you forever, and you're going to spend hours in front of your computer. But the program that I have been using for over a year now is Aurora, which basically handles the processing of multiple image views better than any program I've ever seen. Now, this is called HDR, High Dynamic Range, and I've been critical of high dynamic range processing because I thought for the most part it looked like sci-fi book covers. It wasn't the kind of real images, the kind of documentary work that we have to do as architectural photographers for our clients. However, this program really does a great job. Now, there are some advantages in using a program like this. One, it's a huge time saver when you're doing multiple images. Number two, it has an auto alignment feature that I think alone is worth the price of the app. In other words, if you have 2 or 3 or 4 images and for whatever reason in the field, they are slightly out of register. If you do this by hand, this takes a long time to get it right. This program does it all for you. It saves time in the field. Knowing what you can do with this program can affect how you actually do your work. For example, in shooting interiors, whether you need to bring lighting in. Same thing for outside. Do you need to wait for the shadows to be a certain way or the sun to be a certain way? Or can you shoot it right now knowing that you're going to be able to put these files together in a program like Aurora? Also, it expands the time available to make a photograph. And another thing that it has as a raw file processor, it has a wonderful white balance tool and very precise raw files controls. Now, there's one disadvantage I'll have to let you know. It can be slow if your computer doesn't have the horsepower. And I'll tell you later how you can get a test copy for yourself to see whether or not it works for you. So this is the basic workflow. Now, let me say ahead of time, 3 photographers, 6 opinions. There are ways to do a workflow with any of these programs, whether it's Camera Raw or one of the phase programs. What I've done is I've distilled all of these workflows down to the absolute essence. In other words, the simplest way to do this, and it's also very effective. There are so many more ways you can handle raw file processing. This is what I think is a simple one. So here's how this works. You have your bracket of exposures, and you go through, and like I did in this one, you pick the exposures that have the information that you want. And then you right click and open them. You'll see when you've downloaded the program, Aurora HDR 2019, open all of them in the Aurora app. And this is what you'll get. You'll get a screen that looks like this. First thing you do is click on the auto alignment. And I'm telling you, this is magic. Especially if you're outside and maybe your tripod isn't as steady as you need it to be, this will save you. Then the next thing you do, there's a little wheel here, and you click on this for additional controls. And what you'll find, number one, is select ghost reduction, so that if you're shooting outside, the leaves are moving around, you can pick one exposure as your basic exposure, and it will avoid including ghost images. That's a wonderful tool, and I set it for the highest. Generally, I will set it for the median exposure, but if I'm outside, sometimes I will set it for one that's maybe a third of a stop under or a half a stop under, particularly if it's a windy day and the normal exposure, the right exposure, I have some movement in the trees. Now, you can use the select chromatic aberration reduction to get rid of the red and green, and it does it beautifully. Then over here, after you've done these, click Create HDR. And you'll get a screen that looks like this, and it will have blended these exposures together. This will not be perfect, but it will be damn good. They have presets down here, and the presets, again, start to look like sci-fi book cover. You don't even worry about those. The first thing you can do is to set the white balance. And the white balance is just wonderful. Now, once you set the white balance, it's going to change exposure. And I go down the line here, just like I do with Camera Raw processing. And I try to make sure I am still creating an image that looks normal, not overly processed. So start with the white balance tool and then move through these other controls, and just like if you're new to the program, experiment with these, pin these needles and see what you can and can't do. For example, with saturation and vibrance, just like in the Camera Raw, I'm careful with that because you can make your photo look awfully cartoony, and that, again, that's not generally what we want for architectural photography. Once you go through this, and again, be careful not to over process, open it in Photoshop when you're done. Now, I create a macro in Photoshop for the following. Aurora default mode is 16 bits per channel. I changed that to 8 bits. The Aurora default color space is Melissa RGB. I changed this to the Adobe RGB 1998. My camera's set to that, my monitor is set to that, everything is set to that. And then the Aurora default resolution is 72. I change it to 300, again, without resampling. Just change it to 300 and the size of your image will change accordingly. So you might want to freeze here. This is my macro that I use. And then fine tune it in Photoshop. And there are little things once you get to Photoshop, burning and dodging little areas, but it will be a lot easier having blended these photos together with Aurora. And then save it with a unique file name. Now here's an example of a high contrast exterior. This is very typical where I live in South Florida. The sun is really harsh. You get deep shadows and burned out highlights if you're not careful. So this is the zero exposure. So I've used an underexposed one, so I get my the white stucco properly exposed. and then plus 0.7, EV of 1.7 to get enough light in the shadows. Blending them together, I have a completely natural looking image where I have details in the highlights, details in the shadow, and it does not look like a sci-fi book cover. This is another example of purely of a landscape image. And sometimes you don't have the opportunity to shoot at exactly the time of day that you would like because of client restrictions. If you're shooting a commercial establishment, you might not be able to get there when you want to get there. Knowing that you can make these corrections will save your stomach lining, because you know you can shoot and make these corrections. So this bright hot spot here and the sky, I took care of this here. As I'm moving through these exposures, more and more shadows come into play, and then I blend them all together so I have details in my highlights, details in my shadow, and frankly, a very natural looking image. Now, I did this just for an example. If for some reason you are only able to make one exposure, generally I recommend, if you're going to make a choice between a little overexposed or a little underexposed, go for the underexposed image, because you can work with that a little bit better. The blown out highlights you're not going to be able to do much with those. But if you've got shadows that are dark, you can pick them up. And this is a single unedited file. I basically have burned out highlights here, so it looks like, and I have shadows with nothing. I brought this into Aurora and went through the entire process and basically saved this shot. You can get a demo copy for yourself, and you can try it out. You can see how it works, knowing that with any of these kinds of programs, the more you work with it, the more facile it is. And any workflow, when you first look at it, oh my God, this is way too much. It's not. This is really a very simple and facile program. Now, I mentioned that I do have an affiliate marketing agreement with Skylum. And the reason that I have that is I believe in this product. This has saved me literally hundreds of hours of processing time with my projects when I've had to deal with multiple image layering. So what I'm going to ask you to do, please, is there's a link here. If you're interested, please use that link. This way, Skylum and Aurora know that you've seen it through my site. You can test it out, and then if you decide to purchase it, they will know that you've purchased it because you saw this demo on our channel. And again, like the book sales, this does help support the channel. So again, think about purchasing go to StephenBrookePhotography.com, Architectural Photography and Composition. It's a great book. I'm sure you're going to get a lot out of it. If you're enjoying these videos, give them a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel. We'll let you know when more videos are coming. Let your fellow photographers and friends know about it. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.